The Seattle Seahawks have had a very aggressive trading history.
Breaking news on CBS Sports HQ, Jets All-Pro former Jets All-Pro defensive back Jamal Adams has been traded to the Seattle Seahawks.
Russell Wilson has been traded to the Denver Broncos.
For better or for worse, Pete Carroll and Schneider have used the trading market to its full effect to build the Seahawks into the team that they are today and the team that they have been in years past. And the Seahawks have not been afraid to make really, really big trades. You know, they've swung for the fences just about every single year with one high-impact trade. And just like in actual baseball, sometimes you swing for the fences and you hit a home run. And sometimes you swing for the fences and you spin around, you throw your bat into the left field stands, and you end up on your face. And both of those outcomes are true for Seattle. So in today's video, I thought it would be a pretty fun idea to look over some of Seattle's biggest trades in the Pete Carroll and Schneider era and kind of get a good overview on what damage has been done or what improvements have been made to the Seahawks roster as a whole throughout this past decade and change. So I'm going to be taking a look at every single major trade that the Seahawks have made since 2010, and then at the end, I'm going to give my full thoughts on all that they've done throughout those years. So before we get started with this video, please make sure to subscribe to the channel. We are on the road to 10 million subscribers, and I would really appreciate it if you could help me reach that. So don't forget to press that subscribe button and hit that notifications bell so you don't miss it when I upload brand new videos that were also guaranteed to be bangers. Probably. But all right, ladies and gentlemen, without further ado, let's go ahead and get into the list. Starting in 2010, on October 5th, they traded a 4th and a 5th round pick for Marshawn Lynch. This was a really, really good start. Marshawn Lynch, as you guys know, was a featured running back in the Seahawks for many years to come, helped us win the Super Bowl. I don't really need to give a big monologue about Marshawn Lynch. You guys get it. But I think another underrated trade that they made that year, about a week later, they traded Deion Branch for a 4th round pick, and that 4th round pick ended up turning into KJ Wright. So I think a really good value get for the Seahawks. Now, I will say something. I will make a little caveat at the beginning of the video here. A lot of these trades are not player-for-player swaps. They are player-for-pick swaps or pick-for-pick swaps. And I understand that it's not perfect logic to say that this pick was traded and turned into this player, so therefore the Seahawks traded for this player, or they traded this player. But for the purpose of this video, that's what we're going to be using. Some of these picks I don't think would have been made had, you know, the original team had this pick selection. But that's okay, because I think it's fair to understand the value that they could have gotten and if they wouldn't have traded that asset, if that kind of makes sense. So you'll kind of see what I'm talking about later in the video, where picks, again, were traded by Seattle or to Seattle, and they took a guy who was either really good or really bad or whatever. And again, if they took somebody really good, that's who you could have gotten. So I want you guys to kind of understand the value and understand the way that I think about this. But then in 2011, the Seahawks traded a plethora of draft picks. They traded away a 2nd, a 5th, and a 7th. And in return, they got a 3rd, a 4th, and a 5th. And why am I talking about this trade? It's just a bunch of mid-round draft picks. Well, with that 5th overall pick, they ended up taking Richard Sherman. So again, Seahawks wheeling and dealing and then nailing the draft has kind of been the theme of the early 2010s for them. In 2012, they traded away the 2012 first-round pick, which was pick number 12. They got in return pick number 15 in that draft and a 6th round pick. Now, the reason that trade was impactful, that pick 15 ended up being Bruce Smith. Later in the draft, with that 6th round pick, the Seahawks got Jeremy Lane, so 2 pretty good gets. But unfortunately, who the Eagles took with pick number 12 is Fletcher Cox, the best interior defensive lineman other than Aaron Donald of our era, in my opinion, and a position that really I think the Seahawks have been trying to fill for many years. So that one stings a little bit. But later in 2012, we were able to trade the 43rd overall pick in exchange for the 47th overall pick, a 5th, and a 7th. That 47th overall pick ended up being Bobby Wagner. So a pretty good deal for the Seahawks right there. Even though you kind of lost out on Fletcher Cox in the 1st round, definitely made up for it in the 2nd round, getting that Bobby Wagner pick. And then obviously in the 3rd round, they took Russell Wilson. So I think 2013 was the year that Seattle started to get really ballsy with their picks. They kind of knew that they had a Super Bowl team, and I think they wanted to make some win-now moves to try to get them in position to win the Super Bowl, which ultimately they did. So at the end of the day, you know, how unsuccessful really could they have been? But in 2013, they pulled off the first oopsie, I guess you could say. In 2013, they traded pick number 25 a 7th-round pick, and a 3rd-round pick to the Minnesota Vikings for Percy Harvin. Now, aside from the fact that Percy Harvin really didn't pan out for the Seahawks at all, he did have that kick return touchdown in the Super Bowl, which was dope. Didn't really affect the outcome of the game, but it was dope. Percy Harvin really never did anything for Seattle, and we would end up trading him a year or two later to the Jets for like a 6th-round pick. So really a bad trade, but it hurts even more because in that trade, the Vikings took Xavier Rhodes with the 25th overall pick. Again, a really good corner for many years. The Vikings were able to get with the 25th pick. And then in the 3rd round, they ended up taking Jerick McKinnon, who was a really solid, and still is a really solid, I think, rotational back in the NFL. He's a good receiving threat as well. So the Vikings definitely made out like bandits in that trade. Like I said, then in 2014, we would trade Percy Harvin to the Jets for a 6th-round pick. And in 2015, the Seahawks made another oh shit trade. They acquired Jimmy Graham and a 4th for Max Unger and a 1st-round pick. Max Unger was one of the best centers in the entire NFL for many, many years, and they traded him and a 1st-round pick. The Seahawks just love giving away their 1st-round picks. And a 1st-round pick for Jimmy Graham, who was a generational tight end. And his first couple seasons in Seattle were kind of rough, and he kind of did turn it around, but he really wasn't ever the prime New Orleans Jimmy Graham I think that he was. I think 2017, though, was a pretty good year for him in Seattle. But another big ballsy trade. Keep in mind, this is the year after the Seahawks had lost in the Super Bowl, after winning the Super Bowl the year prior. So, again, I think they're trying to get back to that really strong Super Bowl contention team. And they gave Russell Wilson another weapon, which really isn't a bad logical move in and of itself. However, trading away Max Unger seemed to domino effect the downgrading and the just plummeting in quality of the offensive line for many years. Russell Wilson, his tenure in Seattle, his last 5 or 6 years in Seattle, the offensive line was putrid, and that man was running for his life. And I think the Max Unger trade really sparked it because Seattle really hasn't found a good center since Max Unger, and I think the center position is the 2nd most important offensive line position behind left tackle, and they didn't have a center for many years, and that was costly, unfortunately. In 2016, this is a good trade the Seahawks made. They traded away their 2016 1st-round pick for another 2016 1st-round pick, a later one, and a 3rd-round pick. That 1st-round pick that they traded to the Denver Broncos would end up being Paxton Lynch, who had a lot of pre-draft hype but was never able to perform. Now, unfortunately, the Seahawks really didn't capitalize on that. They took Jermaine Ifedi in the 1st round, who was at best a solid tackle, nothing crazy. They also got a 3rd-round pick. I think 2017 they made another big trade. They traded for Sheldon Richardson and a 7th-round pick, and in exchange they gave the New York Jets Jermaine Kearse and a 2nd-round pick. Now, Sheldon Richardson really never had the impact that I think a lot of Seahawks fans wanted him to have, but he was still a solid get, but I think it was disappointing. And also, Jermaine Kearse, he was a fan favorite in Seattle. I mean, he caught that ridiculous bobble in the Super Bowl, and he was one of Russell Wilson's guys. I think it kind of sucked trading away Sheldon Richardson and really not getting back something of value, if you know what I mean. Let's talk about 2018. 2018, this one also kind of hurts. Seattle's habit of trading back in the draft is good for acquiring more capital, but sometimes you miss out on those really special guys. And this is an instance right here. We traded our 1st-round pick to the Green Bay Packers and an additional 4th to move back in the 1st round with the Packers. The Packers would end up taking Yahir Alexander, one of the best corners in the entire NFL still to this day. And then the Seahawks, with that pick, took Rashad Penny, the much maligned Rashad Penny, who had a very hard time staying on the field. I'm still a big Rashad Penny believer. I think that if he could stay healthy, he is legitimately one of the best running backs in the NFL. But I can't deny that, obviously, the Packers won that trade, getting a all-pro corner for an injury-prone running back. It just sucks, man. It just sucks. I wish the Seahawks would have just stayed pat and picked Alexander. In 2019, this is another pretty good one for the Seahawks. They would trade Frank Clark in a 2019 3rd-round pick for a 1st-round pick, a 3rd-round pick, and a 2nd-round pick. Now, with that first, again, they took L.J. Collier, so they didn't really capitalize on that too much. But they also were able to finagle their way and trade some other picks, and Eventually, that led to the Seahawks taking DK Metcalf later in the second round of that draft. So at the end of the day, if it was just a Frank Clark for DK Metcalf swap straight up, I will take that trade if I'm the Seahawks. So can't complain too much because we did end up with DK Metcalf. And this is a big one right here. This is the one that I'm going to spend a lot of time talking about because it's very personal to me. And honestly, it makes me cry a little bit. In 2020, the Seattle Seahawks traded Bradley McDougald, a 2021 first-round pick, a 2022 first-round pick for Jamal Adams, and a fourth-round pick. Now, the Jets, with that pick, ended up taking, as you can tell, Garrett Wilson in last year's draft, which, sucked because Garrett Wilson's awesome. And then in that 2021 first, they kind of traded around a little bit. That pick ended up being Christian Darrisaw, which the Jets didn't get. That went to the Minnesota Vikings, obviously. And then the Seahawks got Jamal Adams. Jamal Adams is a guy, man, he just hasn't had it with the Seahawks. We signed him to that big extension. We kind of had to after trading all that capital for him. But he just hasn't been able to be what he was promised to be. That game-changing, that, all over the field impact safety. He's been hurt. He's been at times bad in coverage, bad with his, ball skills. And last year he missed the whole year except for like one quarter, with a knee injury. So it kind of sucks. I will say, though, that fourth-round pick that we got in exchange also was Kobe Bryant, who, other than being one of the greatest basketball players of all time, also doubles as a pretty solid and a pretty underrated slot corner in the NFL. Honestly, he might be the best DB that we got in that trade. And saying that is pretty sad out loud. And I'm going to go cry after I record this video, most definitely. But that is the trade. That's the Jamal Adams trade. That's the trade that a lot of people point to and say, ooh, the Seahawks were a little too aggressive there. The Jets definitely made a good trade to get 2 firsts for Jamal Adams. And, hopefully Jamal can bounce back with the Seahawks next year. That's really all I could say. And then the last big trade that we're going to cover is 2022's edition of the mega trade. It is the Russell Wilson trade. I'm not going to cover that trade. I have a whole video covering it. So click up there if you want to watch my video. It's gone pretty viral if I don't say so myself. Anyway, that's the Seahawks trade history. There's a lot of names thrown around there, and there's a lot of people doing whatever, right? A lot of picks being swapped that I didn't even mention. So here's the skinny of it. The skinny of it is that in the mid-2010s, the Seahawks were a legitimate Super Bowl contender every year. They went to 2, they won 1. Part of that was because of the trades that the Seahawks made. They traded directly for Marshawn Lynch. They traded for the picks for KJ Wright, for Richard Sherman, for Bobby Wagner. They wheeled and dealed a lot. And I think in the early days, it definitely benefited them. But they made some really aggressive moves, and they made some really bad calls that kind of cost them for a few years. And honestly, I'm going to give an analogy here. And I'm going to compare the Seahawks trade history directly to one thing, and then I'm going to explain it. The Seahawks trade history are like Spider-Man movies. Now, hear me out. Hear out what I'm going to say. Some of the trades are masterpieces. They are chef's kiss. They are, the cream of the crop, right? That would be, your Russell Wilson trade. That would be your Marshawn Lynch trade, stuff like that. That is like the trade equivalent of like Into the Spider-Verse, Across the Spider-Verse, Spider-Man 2. You know what I mean? Like great, perfect movies. You don't need to do nothing with it. And then you have some kind of you have some kind of whatever trades. Like the Jimmy Graham trade, a couple other ones like that. Some pick swaps and everything like that. Sheldon Richardson trade. Whatever. Those are kind of like your Spider-Man 3s. It's kind of like your Far From Homes. You know what I'm saying? Like, not bad. Definitely could have been a lot better, but like, you can't complain too much. It's not a big loss. And then you have some just absolutely putrid ones. You've got, the Jamal Adams one. You got the Percy Harvin one. You got a lot of other ones like that. And those are your Amazing Spider-Man movies. Those are the TASMs. Those are, a lot of stuff like that. Ones that really set the Seahawks back years, prevented us from being a lot more successful than we probably could have, and honestly, I think put a stain on the Pete Carroll and John Schneider era. Their aggressiveness has served us very well in the past, but it's also bitten us in the ass more times than none. So that's what I just want to say. But I just want to take a video today to talk about the Seattle Seahawks trade history and review it and say how interesting it is. hope you guys enjoyed this video. If you guys did, please don't forget to subscribe to the channel. I will catch you guys in tomorrow's video. Don't forget, I love you, and don't forget to brush your teeth tonight before you go to bed.